If you don't know anything about graphic design, this video is where you start. Hi, my name is Andy and I've been working as a graphic designer for the past 8 years. In this video, I'll share with you the 4 basic principles of graphic design, and I guarantee by the end of it, you will have enough knowledge to build designs that are comprehensible, well organized, and pretty to look at. This video is somewhat based on the Non-Designer's Design book by Robin Williams. It's a great book. If you want to go more in depth, make sure to check it out. People with no design background can usually tell when a design looks bad. What they cannot do is point out why it's bad or even what to do to fix it. Having a short list of things to look for in a bad design, and even better, knowing what they are and how to name them, can make this process much easier. That's why it's such a good thing that these 4 concepts have names. Once you can name the problem, you can find the solution. Graphic design can be broken down into 4 basic principles: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Or crap, if that makes it easier for you to remember. Okay, I really wanted to make that joke, but that's not the actual order in which we'll go through these. I'm sorry. Instead, let's start with proximity, which I believe to be the easiest to understand. For each of the principles, I'll first show you how they exist outside of design, in more relatable situations of our daily lives. Then we can just translate the concept into design. And just so happens that we use the principle of proximity every day. Imagine for a second that you live in a house with no inside walls, just one big room. You would probably still be able to tell which room is which because the furniture would be somewhat organized in clusters. Things that relate to each other would be physically close. The bed, the wardrobe, and the bedside table. Well, that's the bedroom. The sink, the fridge, and the stove. That's the kitchen. And since we're in the kitchen, what about ingredients in a recipe? Separated, they are just ingredients, but when you put them together, they make a dish. That's proximity. And how could you talk about proximity and not talk about people? You might handshake a stranger, but you would hug a friend and definitely kiss a loved one. In both design and life, physical closeness implies relationship. The principle of proximity serves 2 core purposes. First and foremost, it creates organization and order. When several elements are close together, they become one visual unit, rather than several separate ones. And secondly, it establishes a connection between these elements and creates new meanings to them. When you group related things together, the final product will have more meaning than the sum of its parts. Random letters on a page don't make words. It's the grouping of specific letters that does. And the grouping of specific words make a sentence, and then a paragraph, and then a full article. And a full article has more meaning than just random words on a page. In practical terms, proximity is as simple as it gets. There are only 2 rules to follow. First, if 2 elements are related to each other, they should be physically close. And second, if 2 elements are not related to each other, they should be further apart. When we talk about proximity, we talk about closeness, but also distance. Don't be afraid, for example, to have empty spaces on your layout. They are an essential part of a good design. Remember, letters next to each other might make words, but you need distance between words to tell them apart and have a readable sentence. The principle of proximity is all over the place in design. It's on listed items on a website's menu. Look at how easily we can spot that there are 3 categories of items on the menu. It's also on landing pages. Observe how proximity gives this website a clear flow for our eyes. We start here, then go here, then here. Proximity is on comments on a blog post. Look at how the profile pictures, names, and comments are grouped in single units, and there's empty space separating one comment from the other. Proximity is on the contact information of a business card. You read the first line and you already have a clue of what's below. And honestly, proximity is on every single app you have on your phone. Look at how quick we can spot the groups of information on this layout. The use of the white rectangles on the background also helps a lot with that. Now, let's go over some tips to apply proximity to your design. Make yourself aware of it. Proximity is something that you probably already use naturally when designing, but just isn't pushing it as far as it can go or using it as effectively as it can be. So make yourself aware that the concept exists and consciously bring elements closer or further apart as needed. Think about proximity systematically. Analyze your design from top to bottom and decide which element should be close to which. Make good use of empty space. You don't have to use all the real estate in your page, unless really is more in design. Empty space gives your design room to breathe and provide an easy flow from one element to the other. Organization and making the information clear to the viewer takes priority over beauty and style. The message you're trying to communicate is the most important aspect of your design. It is preferable to have something highly understandable but modest on the visual appeal than something packed with style but poor at communicating. As you become better at design, you are free to bend this rule. But for now, prioritize organization. Proximity also applies to the edges of your artwork. If you leave elements too close to the border of your design, it feels suffocating. It feels like they are almost going to leave the page. Everything in a design needs room to breathe, so keep that in mind. Have a margin around your design that no element should ever cross. Proximity is the key to organizing your content. It is the foundation of this lesson, and every new principle will build on top of it. It is simple and easy to apply, so give it some time and practice and you will master it. The next one we'll talk about is alignment. And just like proximity, alignment is also something that we naturally, subconsciously do all the time. And by alignment, I mean literally, physically aligning things. Just like your couch is probably aligned dead center with the TV, and if you're on a computer, your chair is probably aligned to the very center of your monitor. We may not consciously think about it, but we're always aligning things to other things. Let's imagine we're placing pictures on a wall. We won't just arbitrarily place them in random places. We'll align them somehow. We can align them centered, either vertically or horizontally. We can also align them to the left, to the right, or even a mix of both. It turns out that aligning things gives a very satisfactory feeling for most people. It gives them a sense of organization, sense of order. Alignment and proximity sum up virtually any organization method. You group things by how related they are to each other and organize them using some sort of alignment, just like clothes in the closet or books on a shelf. Even entire cities use proximity and alignment as a way of organization. Neighborhoods use the principle of proximity to group buildings that are close to each other. Buildings are organized using alignment. They're all aligned to the street, just like one block will also be aligned with the next one. And remember how we talked about proximity being about closeness, but also distance? Well, it's the closeness between buildings that group them in a block, but we need the distance to separate one block from the other and thus have an organized city. And the same idea translates to design. Alignment, aided by proximity and vice versa, serves the purpose of organizing your content. The principle of alignment states that no element should be placed arbitrarily on the page. Every element should be aligned to have a visual connection with something else. So you can't just throw things in the page, whatever happens to be room. You have to be conscious about it. When things are aligned, your design will become a stronger, more cohesive unit. Even when elements are physically separated, alignment creates an invisible line in our eyes that connects them together. Even though we separated them to indicate their relationship using the principle of proximity, alignment tells the viewer that they still belong to the same piece. After becoming aware of this invisible line that connects the elements in a design, you will start to see it everywhere. It's on websites and landing pages, on the interface of mobile apps. The line is also there in stationary design. Well, alignment is everywhere. But you may be asking yourself, okay, but how do I choose an alignment? When do I know when I should align left or right or to the center? Is there a rule for that? Well, no, there are no rules in design. But let me give you some insight. Whenever you face this kind of dilemma, should I do this or should I do that with my design? Before anything else, just try both options yourself and see which one you prefer. This process of experimenting and analyzing is what eventually will teach you to naturally know what will look good and what will look bad. The more you do it, the easier it will be to visualize what you want to create before even typing a single letter on the page. You will look at the page and you will see in your mind that one thing will look better than the other. Just experiment. Back to the question though, it really depends on what you're creating. Let's go over a few tips on how to align things properly on a design. Observe the proportions of your design. Does it have more horizontal or vertical space? If it's something with more vertical space, like an Instagram story, it can be harder to align to the sides, so it might be a better option to align elements to the center or even justify them. But if it's something with more horizontal space, like a presentation, you have more freedom to align elements to the sides. This doesn't mean that you're constrained to these options, but horizontal space will usually give you more freedom than vertical space in this matter. A good way to avoid long strings of text that are hard to read is to divide your design into columns, kinda like a newspaper. This also helps you to distribute the elements across the design. You can use one column to place text and the other to place images. Don't forget to also align elements horizontally when they are side by side. When you have several images that need to be added to the design, a good way of approaching it is to crop them so they're all the same size, and then distribute them in a grid, a gallery of images. Just remember to keep the alignment, both vertically and horizontally, and to give some space in between each image. If you're typing a list of items, the preferred alignment is always to the left, since a list usually has some sort of marker for each item, like a bullet or even an icon to illustrate what is written. Aligning to the left will also keep the icons or bullets aligned on top of each other, making it easier to identify as a list and also easier to read. If your language writes from the right to the left, like Arabic or Hebrew, then the preferred alignment is to the right. Be mindful that when you align to the center, you divide the empty space of the page equally on both sides. It creates symmetry, which can be pleasing to look at, but it also reduces the amount of space you have to add other elements. So if you want to add text to your design, but you also need a picture to give it context, it might be better to align the text to one side so you can have more space to add the picture on the other. Alignment can also be used to establish hierarchy in the design. If, in a list, all items are aligned equally, that implies they all belong to the same group. But if you change the alignment on some of the items and give them a little space, you suddenly have different groups of items. Using references is also a big part of becoming a good designer. The more you research about design and the more design content you consume, the easier it becomes to tell apart good design from bad design. So if you're not sure how to place elements on a specific design, it might help to search for similar layouts and see how other designers are doing it. I'll show you some places where you can get references and inspiration later on. For now, let's continue. Let's talk about repetition. I've made the same statement enough times for you to imagine what I'm going to say. Yes, repetition is also a part of our daily lives. Repetition is also everywhere. And perhaps the easiest way to spot repetition in our lives is in routine itself. Sleeping, having breakfast, going to work, having lunch, and so on. Repetition is an important thing for humans because it helps to create habits. And habits allow us to be more productive. Do something consistently enough times, and eventually it will become something natural. Sometimes you even do it without thinking about it. Repetition is also a major part of learning. Do something enough times, and eventually you will become good at it. And at the center of repetition lies consistency. It's not just about doing something repeatedly. It's about doing it in consistent intervals. You cannot drink a gallon of water on Monday, then drink no water at all on Tuesday, and say,
I have the habit of drinking a lot of water.
Just like you cannot go to the gym 3 times in a month and say,
I have been exercising.
It's not just about being consistent in doing. It's about being consistent in when doing. Repetition in design is what ties all the elements together and makes everything that is on the page feel like a part of the whole. The principle of repetition states that some elements of your design be repeated throughout the entire piece. These elements can be a bold font that you use on every title, a set of a few colors that you restrict yourself to using only them, lines that you use to separate content, and even repeated shapes, repeated sizes, or repeated spacings. But while repetition is important to make the design feel consistent, it also supports the other principles and helps the design feel more organized and comprehensible. Repetition is perhaps the most subtle of the 4 principles, because it is not as easy to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. Let's go over a few examples. In this landing page, we can see the repetition happening on the rounded rectangles. Notice how the rounded edges are also present in the Next Page button, the search bar, and the company logo. In these onboarding screens for a payment app, there is great use of repetition through font, spacing, and mainly the illustrations. You get the sense that they all belong together because they use the same colors, texture, and style. In this app for cryptocurrencies, repetition happens everywhere. In the first screen, there is repetition of the rounded rectangles, icons, and text. On the other two screens, we can see the repeated use of lines to separate content and a good consistency in colors, especially on the receive and send buttons, which always use the same color. The rounded edges also appear in all screens. In this investment app, we can see a great use of repetition in the sharp edges. While the other examples had a lot of rounded rectangles, this one uses sharp corners everywhere. In the fonts, the lines of the graphs, buttons, and icons. There's also the repeated use of this cut on the corner of the rectangle, which we see in all three screens. Color is also very consistently used. Repetition in design can sound a little bit confusing, so here are a few tips for implementing it. We can break down a design into 4 elements: text, colors, shapes, and empty spaces. Text is where most of the communication aspect of a design will happen, so the information has to be clear. Use fonts that are simple and clean. Don't go overboard with calligraphy fonts or fonts that have too much detail. It's not that they're bad or wrong, but they are harder to use. For now, try to stick to using sans serif fonts for a more modern look or serif fonts for something more classic and serious. Try to use only 2 fonts, one for headings and titles and other for paragraphs and long strings of text. They can even be 2 different weights of the same font family. For example, we can use Roboto Bold for headings and Roboto Regular for paragraphs. The same applies to font size. Try to have no more than 3 different font sizes on your design. You can have a big font size for a title or a call to action, a medium font size for paragraphs, and a small font size for smaller information like contact or address. Working with colors is much the same. Come up with a palette of 3 colors and restrict yourself to using only them. It's not wrong to have more colors, but the more you add, the harder it becomes to have harmony and balance between them. So start small and allow yourself to add more colors as you become more confident in your skills. If you're having a hard time finding a color that matches the other colors you're using, try making it darker, lighter, or reducing the saturation. You can also go to Adobe Color, which is a free website with hundreds of thousands of color palettes for you to choose from. Shapes also need consistency. If you add a rectangle to your layout and you round the edges, make all rectangles with rounded edges. If you're using circles, try not to use squares. If you're using icons or illustrations, try to match the style of all of them. Icons that have colors and outlines won't match icons that are solid black. For empty spaces, just try to match the distance between elements. When elements are separated by equal distances, the design becomes more organized and visually attractive. Repetition is a subtle aspect of design, but has an incredibly powerful effect. So always keep in mind, when adding new elements to the page, how could they possibly be repeated throughout the entire design? Keep it tight, keep it consistent, and you will take your design to the next level. The next one is contrast, and contrast is probably my favorite of the 4, because it is present in every single form of art. In music, you can have a calm verse contrasting with an aggressive chorus. In a movie, the characters might be chatting in one scene, but in the next there's chaos and explosions. A game can have peaceful moments of wandering through the world, but also epic battles against giant bosses. Even poetry, when we say that roses are red, but violets are blue, even though they're actually violet. In fact, one of my favorite movies, Vanilla Sky, has a quote that reads, "One day you'll know what love truly is. It's the sour and the sweet. And I know the sour, which allows me to appreciate the sweet." And it's contrast. This is what Brian, the character, was referring to. You can only know how sweet the sweet can be once you know the taste of the sour. But not only in art there is contrast. In fact, more than any other principle, contrast is everywhere. And that is because contrast is basically what allows us to see. If there was no contrast between the things we see, we wouldn't be able to see anything at all. It's the light and the dark, the highlights and the shadows of everything that surrounds us that gives us the ability to see. In fact, if you open an image on an editing software and keep lowering the contrast, you'll end up with a flat gray image. And this is what things are with no contrast: gray and boring. In all these examples I gave you, contrast serves roughly the same purposes. Contrast helps you understand where something ends and the other thing begins, just like what happens with our eyesight. Contrast draws your attention to something important, just like a warning sign next to something dangerous. Contrast intensifies whatever two things that might be contrasting with each other, just like the sour and the sweet. The chaos is even more chaotic and the calmness even more calming when they're side by side. Just like the sun seems to shine brighter after 3 days of constant raining. And such as in life, contrast is yet another fundamental part of design. The principle of contrast follows only one major rule. If two elements are not related to each other, make them very different. Not sorta different, not kinda different, very different. Contrast can appear in uncountable ways in design. A heavy font against a light font, a modern font against a classic font, a warm color against a cool color, a bright color against a dark color. Contrast can be created whenever two things are different, whether it is size, color, style, or brightness. Contrast is very effective in drawing attention and making the viewer want to look at your design in the first place. In this image, our eyes are instantly drawn to this illustration because it is contrasting with the rest of the layout. Contrast may also be achieved by using big, bold text or really bright colors. Look at how this poster used text as the main element of the layout and still managed to keep it interesting. The color choices on this one are striking and flashy, while still maintaining balance and harmony. Contrast can also help in creating duality and opposing ideas. Some colors are classic symbols of opposition, like red and blue, and this can be used to great effect. You can also use contrast to highlight different options, useful when trying to be educational or informative. But also, contrast enhances organization and hierarchy within the layout, by separating sections, emphasizing titles, and highlighting important information. It takes the viewer by the hand and guides us through the page. In this example, there's a clear distinction between the sections of the website. We instinctively know that the content will change from one section to the other. Here, the big bold typography makes for a great call to action that strikes curiosity. As we can see, contrast is a very effective way to make a design stand out. You are now at the point where you have already applied the other 3 principles to your work. You separated elements for organization, aligned them so they are visually connected, and repeated what was possible to create consistency. Now think about contrast as the cherry on top. It's the tool you use to add visual interest to your design. Let's go over a few tips on how to use it. Define what is the most interesting or important thing in your design. Once you know what it is, make it stand. Use a bold color as background or make the text bigger. This element is what you want the viewer to look at first. It's where they will start to read the page. If it's not attractive enough, if it doesn't have any visual interest, the viewer will just look for something more interesting to look at. Here's a technique to see if you have enough contrast in your design. Take a break from working on it for a few minutes. Then, when you get back, let your eyes instinctively go to the first place that they're drawn to. That will usually be the place with the most visual interest, the place that is drawing the most attention. If your eyes just wandered through the page with no specific resting point, it means your design is lacking contrast, and you need to create something to draw the attention of the viewer. Don't be afraid of making things very different. Things cannot be similar. They either have the same style and belong to the same unit, or they are completely different. For contrast to be effective, the difference has to be big and bold. You cannot contrast a 12-point font with a 14-point font. You can't contrast dark blue with dark green. Be adventurous and don't be afraid to exaggerate. We read things from top to bottom. So if you're unsure where the most important or interesting thing should be on your design, it has a great chance to be on the top. A big bold text can work wonders. Don't underestimate the power of having a good headline or call to action as the centerpiece of your design. You don't need to have white as your background color. Experiment with other colors. Just be careful because too many vibrant colors at once can hurt in the eye. If you have an image or an illustration, you don't always have to show it entirely. Experiment making it bigger but only showing a part of it. Less is more, especially when you're starting. Sometimes all you need is one good point of contrast in your design. As you practice more and more and apply all the concepts to your designs, they will start to become second nature, and you won't have to consciously think about them all the time. But practicing is not the only thing that you should be doing. One of the most valuable lessons that I can give you is that design is not only about creating. Design is also about observing and understanding. All the artwork that I used in this video comes from creators in Dribble. The links to all of them are in the description below. Places like Dribble, Behance, and even Pinterest can be a great source of design content to immerse yourself into. Look at what other designers are creating and try to spot in their work the things you've learned in this lesson. That being said, real-life experience is also incredibly helpful, and I would love to give feedback on your designs. So there's a link in the description below where you can send me a design you're working on, and if there's enough replies, I'll do a video critiquing and reviewing your designs based on the lessons from this video. If you enjoyed this video, you might also like this one that is showing on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you on the next one. Bye!